The acrid sting of disinfectant clung to the air, burning Thomas's nose as he fought to open his eyes. Machines beeped faintly around him, their rhythm announcing a body still alive, but barely. He couldn't move, his muscles were leaden, his chest heavy. It was then, through the thin curtain of the hospital ward, that he heard voices that sliced deeper than any scalpel. "Jessica, when are we announcing it?" The voice was unmistakable. Frank's, smooth and self-assured. A softer, hesitant laugh followed. "Soon. There's no reason to delay. Thomas won't be with us much longer." His heart stopped, then pounded violently in his chest. Jessica's voice, the woman who was supposed to be his wife, the woman who, by arrangement, by family decree, bore his name, but never once let him touch even the edge of her sleeve. Thomas lay frozen. The conversation outside continued as if he weren't alive, as if he were already buried. "I still don't know why you bothered with him all these years," Frank said. Jessica's voice sharpened, and though muffled, Thomas caught every word. "It was never about him. It was my mother's idea. Keep him under control, make him follow our rules. No late nights, no alcohol, no meat, no games. My mother said a man that obedient could be molded, but he was useless. He couldn't even give us a child. What's the point of keeping him?" The words struck harder than the tubes and needles piercing his veins. Every rule, every ritual, kneeling to Buddha, swallowing ginseng, drinking goji berries until his tongue was numb, he had obeyed. All for them, all for her, and yet, none of it mattered. Frank chuckled low, cruel. "Well, he's out of the picture now. Our future starts tonight." Silence followed, broken only by the squeak of shoes leaving, the footsteps of his betrayal walking away. Tears welled, but they did not fall. The pain in his chest was no longer physical, it was the shattering of a lifetime of illusions. He had given up his pride, his temper, his freedom, all for the Liu family's approval, for Jessica's acceptance, but to them, he had been nothing more than a convenient orphan, an empty vessel to exploit until he broke. His breathing grew shallow, vision tunneling, the ceiling light above, blurred into white haze. Somewhere in the background, alarms beeped frantically, nurses shouting, but Thomas let go. The world dimmed to black, and his final thought was not of love, not of family, but of the bitter taste of betrayal. When his eyes opened again, the scent of disinfectant was gone. Instead, the faint aroma of sandalwood drifted through the air. A familiar living room surrounded him, the carved wooden furniture gleaming, red lanterns hanging neatly along the beams. Laughter and gentle conversation buzzed around him. His hands, once pale and shriveled on the hospital bed, were youthful, steady. And there she was, Jessica's mother, seated across from him, her face kind, her tone deceptively soft. She looked at him with affection that he once mistook for maternal love. "Thomas," she asked sweetly, "do you like our Jessica?" For a moment, he couldn't breathe. It was the same question from years ago. The same setup that had locked him into a loveless marriage, the same trap that had stolen his life. But this time he was different. The sting of disinfectant still lingered in his memory. Jessica's laughter with Frank still echoed in his ears. The weight of 30 wasted years pressed on his soul. He straightened his back, met her eyes with a calm, almost amused smile, and spoke the word that would change everything. No. Thomas had been an orphan for as long as his memory stretched, though he never liked the word. To him, it wasn't simply the absence of parents, it was a brand that others carried like a curse. When his parents' car crashed on a rain-soaked highway, leaving behind nothing but debts and a boy too young to understand, the world quietly decided he was unwanted. Yet the Liu family, Jessica's family, extended a hand. Her father had once been close to Thomas's parents, and her mother wrapped her smile in kindness that seemed genuine. They told everyone they had rescued him, that they had treated him as a son. The truth, Thomas would later realize, was more complicated. They had not adopted him out of pure charity, but out of calculation. An orphan was pliable, obedient, desperate for affection. He could be molded to their liking, bound by guilt, tethered by debt. As a child, Thomas never saw the chains, he only felt gratitude. Every meal they gave him, every book, every night spent under a roof that wasn't the cold dormitory of an orphanage, he thought it was love. Jessica's mother would pat his head and say, "Remember, Thomas, without us, you'd still be starving in the streets." He took her words to heart. Jessica was different then, younger, brighter, still touched by innocence. She wasn't cruel, not yet. In those early days, she was simply a girl next door who sometimes smiled at him, sometimes ignored him. To Thomas, who craved connection, even her smallest kindness was enough to keep him circling her like a star around a sun. As they grew, Thomas began to imagine their bond was something more. They played together in the garden, shared secrets by the old sycamore tree. He thought of her as his childhood sweetheart, though the truth was more one-sided. Jessica's laughter was never quite as warm as he imagined, her eyes often wandering elsewhere when he spoke. But when you are desperate for love, you paint over indifference with the colors of devotion. By the time adolescence came, distance had replaced their playful childhood. Jessica avoided him more, excused herself when their parents suggested they spend time together. Thomas thought it was shyness, modesty. In truth, it was fatigue. Fatigue of having him forced into her orbit, fatigue of her parents' insistence that she see him as more than a foster brother. Rebecca, on the other hand, was the quiet constant in Thomas's life. She was not part of the Liu family, but a classmate who drifted into his circle during high school. While others mocked the orphan boy living on handouts, Rebecca defended him in silence, never with loud words, but with small, steady acts. A shared umbrella when rain caught him unprepared. Notes slid onto his desk when he missed class. A quiet reassurance in her eyes when humiliation cut too deep. Rebecca never demanded gratitude, she never dangled her kindness like bait. Thomas, blinded by Jessica, didn't notice the weight of her loyalty then. Only in hindsight would he recognize Rebecca as the mirror of what true companionship looked like. And then there was Frank. At first glance, he was nothing remarkable, an ordinary classmate with decent grades and an easy smile. His family wasn't wealthy, his presence never commanding. To Thomas, Frank was a background character in his world, someone to nod at during group projects, nothing more. But behind that plain exterior lay a secret Thomas would only uncover too late. Frank was the one Jessica had chosen. Not the orphan indebted to her parents, not the boy who had been molded into obedience, but the ordinary classmate whose very lack of weight made him easier to love. Thomas's role in the Liu family crystallized after high school. Jessica's mother, with her ever-calculating gaze, began pressing harder. She suggested that Thomas and Jessica were fated, that their marriage would honor both families. At first, Thomas felt overwhelmed. Marriage, so soon. But the idea quickly grew on him. Hadn't he always loved her? Hadn't he always been the one trailing after her, desperate to earn her attention? Now, with her mother's blessing, it seemed his devotion had been rewarded. He didn't notice Jessica's silence. He didn't notice her tightly pressed lips whenever her mother mentioned marriage. He only saw the glimmer of his dream turning real. From that point on, his life ceased to be his own. Jessica's mother imposed rules under the guise of care. No drinking, Thomas, alcohol weakens your body. No meat, it makes men hot-tempered, you must be calm for Jessica. Lights out by 9, a good husband needs discipline. He obeyed all of it, even when she brought bowls of bitter ginseng and goji berry soup, commanding him to swallow them daily. He did so without question. Even when she insisted he kneel before the Buddha and pray for fertility, he pressed his forehead to the cold stone floor until his skin bruised. The humiliation wasn't in the rituals themselves, it was in how willingly he accepted them. Every time Jessica's mother imposed another restriction, Thomas felt himself shrinking, becoming smaller, more obedient. He thought it was the price of being loved. He thought submission was how you proved loyalty. But the rewards never came. Jessica remained distant, untouched. Nights passed with them lying on opposite sides of the bed, a gulf wider than oceans between their bodies. She never let him close, never let his hand linger on hers. Whenever the topic of children arose, her mother's eyes turned sharp, accusing. Why haven't you given us a petit grandson, Thomas? Are you even capable? The insults cut deep, but Thomas bore them silently. He thought of the debt he owed them, how they had raised him, sheltered him. Each word of mockery, he convinced himself, was deserved. He told himself he was lucky simply to be under their roof, lucky to be Jessica's husband in name. Inside, anger brewed. He remembered once, in a moment of weakness, nearly raising his hand against Jessica's mother after she mocked him in front of relatives. She clutched her chest and cried out, "How ungrateful! If not for us, you'd have died on the streets. Is this how you repay us?" Her words froze him, shackled him. Gratitude became his Achilles heel, the chain he could never break. so he swallowed his rage and bowed his head, accepting humiliation as his companion. To outsiders, Thomas seemed fortunate, married into a wealthy family, surrounded by luxury. To them, he was the orphan who had struck gold, but envy blinded them to the truth, that wealth was a cage, that his marriage was a performance, that every smile Jessica gave him in public was another mask. Rebecca saw through it. She saw his exhaustion, the hollowness in his eyes. She wanted to speak, to intervene, but she knew her place. She was only a friend, a witness. Still, her quiet presence reminded Thomas that kindness could exist without strings attached. Frank, meanwhile, lurked at the edges of Thomas's world. He was just a classmate, just an acquaintance, or so Thomas thought. Yet, in the spaces where Thomas was denied warmth, Frank was given it freely. Behind closed doors, Jessica's aloofness melted for him. The smile she never gave Thomas, she gave to Frank. The affection Thomas begged for, she handed to another man without hesitation. Thomas did not see it then. His naivety was a shield and a curse. He thought himself blessed, when in truth, he was the butt of a cruel joke. This was the life he lived before the hospital bed, before the scent of disinfectant, before overhearing Jessica's voice promising a future with Frank. It was a life built on obedience, gratitude, and blind devotion, foundations that cracked under the weight of betrayal. And when he awoke again, reborn in the Liu family's home, those cracks became fault lines. For the first time, Thomas was not blinded. He saw Jessica's distant eyes, her mother's calculated smile, Frank's ordinary charm, Rebecca's quiet loyalty. He saw them all for what they truly were. And he vowed that this time, he would not play the fool. Thomas had always believed the Liu household was his only refuge. With his parents gone, every corner of that grand house had seemed like shelter, until the day he discovered what had been kept from him all along. It happened quietly, almost too quietly. He was passing by the mailbox, a bundle of envelopes tucked under the housekeeper's arm. Among them was one with his name, the handwriting unfamiliar, the foreign stamps glaring in contrast to the dull domestic ones. Before the housekeeper could slip it into the pile for Jessica's mother, Thomas's hand closed over it. Inside, he found words from an uncle he barely remembered, his mother's half-brother, who had left for F country years ago. The letter spoke of opportunities, of longing to reconnect, of wealth built overseas. Enclosed was a thin slip of paper, currency bills, foreign and crisp, and an airline ticket. Thomas's breath caught. But something else caught sharper, anger. This was not the first letter. The words hinted at 9 before it. 9 attempts to reach him, all intercepted, all hidden, and he knew who had hidden them. Jessica's mother, the ever-smiling woman who claimed to treat him like her own son. The betrayal was sharper because it was quiet. She had never raised her voice to forbid him from leaving. She had simply concealed the world outside until he forgot it existed. For the first time, Thomas realized how deep her control ran. Still, he folded the letter carefully and hid it in his pocket. His face, when he returned to the living room, wore the same polite mask it always did. Inside, though, something shifted. The shift grew sharper at the class reunion. The KTV was loud, pulsing with colored lights and off-key singing. His former classmates filled the room with laughter and nostalgia, their faces blurred by alcohol. Thomas entered late, carrying himself with the quiet dignity of someone still learning how to breathe in his new life. At first, they teased Jessica playfully. "Why isn't Thomas here yet? Did you tie him to the study desk again?" Jessica frowned, her lips curving in disdain. "I'm sick of him. Who would want to marry him? He's like a shadow that never goes away." Laughter exploded around the table. Some nudged her, others asked, "Then who do you like? Our class president Frank?" Frank shifted uncomfortably, but Jessica leaned ever so slightly toward him. Her shoulder brushed his, as if by accident, though the sparkle in her eye betrayed intention. The gesture was small, almost nothing, but to Thomas it was everything. She had just dismissed him before their entire circle, leaning toward the man she actually wanted. The room's laughter dimmed when they noticed Thomas at the doorway. He stood under the flashing lights, his expression unreadable. Jessica froze, then sneered. "Thomas, what are you trying to pull now?" Every eye turned to him. Once, the old Thomas would have bowed his head, mumbled apologies, and left. But this Thomas, reborn with the echo of hospital disinfectant still clinging to his soul, merely smiled. "If I'm so unwanted, Jessica," he said, his voice steady and almost amused, Then why did you keep taking my gifts? Shameless, don't you think? The words fell like a stone into water, ripples silencing the room. Jessica's face flushed, her lips parting as if to retort, but Thomas didn't give her the chance. He clapped his hands lightly, as though dismissing the matter. Never mind, he said. If I'm not welcome, I'll leave. And he did, walking out before anyone could stop him. That night, back in his room, he pulled the hidden letter from beneath his pillow and read it again. His uncle's words were not simply an invitation, they were an escape. F-Country, with its opportunities and distance, offered freedom. A place beyond Jessica's mother's grip, beyond Jessica's indifference, beyond Frank's shadow. Thomas began to prepare, quietly, methodically, like a man sharpening a blade in the dark. He visited the bank, under the pretense of meeting classmates. There, he split his inheritance into 2 accounts, half to remain local, half transferred abroad. He secured a passport, dusting off documents Jessica's family thought useless. He began sorting through his belongings, choosing what to leave behind, what to carry forward. Every action was deliberate, cloaked under the mask of his usual obedience. Jessica's mother praised him for his discipline, never noticing how her grip was slipping. And Jessica herself, she noticed too late. She had always assumed Thomas would follow her like a shadow. No matter how coldly she spoke, no matter how sharp her mother's words cut, he would remain. That was his role, the orphan indebted, the obedient husband, the man who would never leave. But after that reunion, something unsettled her. Thomas no longer hovered. He no longer begged for her attention, no longer sought approval in her gaze. When she snapped at him, he only smiled faintly, as if her words were wind. When her mother ordered him to drink another bitter concoction, he sipped without complaint, but there was something in his eyes, something distant. Jessica found herself restless. One evening, she cornered him in the hallway. "Why did you say that at the reunion?" she demanded. "First you confess you like me, and now you treat me like a sister. Are you playing games with me?" Thomas regarded her calmly. "Your mother treats me like her own son," he said, softly. "But even real sons are allowed to rebel once in a while, why shouldn't I?" Her eyes widened. This was not the Thomas she knew, the boy who bent under every scolding, who swallowed every insult with silence. This Thomas met her words with a smile that chilled her. "You're acting strange," she muttered. "So?" His smile widened, razor thin. "Isn't this what you wanted, for me to stop chasing you? Shouldn't you be happy?" She bit her lip, unable to answer. For years, she had resented his shadow. Now that it pulled away, why did her chest feel hollow? In secret, Thomas wrote in a small notebook, mapping the steps of his departure. Rebecca noticed the change first, not in his words, but in his posture, the way his shoulders carried quiet determination. She asked once, gently, "Are you planning something?" He met her gaze, surprised, then gave a faint nod. Rebecca said nothing more. She understood what silence could mean, and her silence was not judgment but solidarity. Frank, meanwhile, grew bolder. Emboldened by Jessica's subtle lean at the reunion, he lingered near her more often. Thomas noticed, but instead of fury, he felt something colder, clarity. Frank was not his rival, he was Jessica's choice. Let them have each other, let them rot together. For the first time in his life, Thomas realized he didn't need to fight for her, he only needed to walk away. And yet, walking away was not enough, not anymore. He would leave, yes, he would build a new life beyond their reach. But when he returned, because he would return, it would be on his terms. And then, Jessica and her family would taste the humiliation he had swallowed for years. As Jessica lay awake one night, tossing and turning, she realized something terrifying. She no longer controlled him. The shadow she had despised was gone, and in its place stood a man she could not read. For Thomas, that realization was TMCR, his sweetest revenge of all. Thomas lay awake most nights, staring at the ceiling beams of the Liu household, counting them like prison bars. The letter from his uncle sat folded beneath his pillow, its foreign ink burning hotter than fire. It was not simply paper, it was a door. A door to freedom, to a life unchained from Jessica's coldness and her mother's control. And yet, even with that door unlocked, Thomas hesitated. The Liu family had raised him, hadn't they? He still remembered the first winter after his parents' deaths, how Liu father had given him a coat that smelled faintly of mothballs but kept him warm, how Liu mother had smiled and said, "You're our son now." Those memories tangled like vines around his chest. To walk away meant admitting that everything, his obedience, his loyalty, his suffering, had all been for nothing. But then the darker memories rose. Jessica's mother slamming down another bowl of bitter soup, insisting he swallow it to strengthen his body. The long nights forced to kneel before the Buddha statue, whispering prayers for children that never came, his knees bruised and raw against cold stone. The suffocating restrictions, no meat, no alcohol, no laughter too late at night, as if joy itself were forbidden. And always, Jessica, lying beside him like a porcelain doll, beautiful but untouchable. Not once had she allowed him into her arms, not even when the family scolded him for her failure to conceive. He could still hear her mother's sneer. "Are you even a man, Thomas?" The weight of those words never left him. He rolled onto his side and caught sight of the bracelet beads scattered across the floor. Once, Jessica had ripped the bracelet she herself had given him, beads bouncing like shattered memories. He crouched down now, picking one up between his fingers. The small sphere reflected faint light, fragile yet unbreakable. Once, he had thought every gift from Jessica was proof of love. Now, he saw them for what they were, trinkets thrown to keep him quiet, to make him believe he mattered. And then there was the kitten. He remembered it with piercing clarity, the little Siamese he had brought home on their wedding anniversary, hoping to brighten her heart. Jessica had smiled faintly, but her mother's scolding was swift. "Are you trying to curse us? A cat will harm Jessica's fertility. Get rid of it at once." Thomas had cradled the tiny creature in his arms as it mewed softly, confused, unwanted. He gave it to a classmate who promised to care for it, but in his heart, he never forgave himself. That kitten was him, affection unwanted, warmth cast out, a life dismissed for superstition. Those memories became his torment. They played over and over as he debated. Was he betraying the family that raised him, or was he finally saving himself? Jessica noticed the change. One evening, she cornered him in the hallway, the soft light of a wall lantern illuminating her sharp cheekbones. "Thomas," she said, voice taut with frustration, "why did you say that in front of everyone? Yesterday you confessed to me, today you call me a sister. Are you mocking me?" He met her gaze steadily. The old Thomas would have apologized immediately, would have begged her forgiveness, but this, Thomas only smiled faintly, like a man who had already stepped outside the cage. "You're upset?" he asked quietly. "Isn't this what you wanted, for me to stop chasing you? Now that I say I don't like you, shouldn't you be relieved?" Her lips trembled. "That's not the point. You humiliated me in front of everyone. My mother, she treats you like her own son. How can you repay her like this?" Thomas almost laughed. Her own son. That line, repeated endlessly, had once silenced him, but not anymore. "Even real sons," he said softly, "argue with their mothers. Isn't that normal?" Jessica flinched, as though struck. He saw it then, the fear in her eyes, fear that the boy she once controlled so easily no longer bent under her hand. "You're strange lately," she whispered. "Strange?" He tilted his head. "Or perhaps, finally myself?" She had no answer. She turned away, frustrated, and he watched her go, his heart cold and steady. Rebecca appeared in small moments, as she always had. She found Thomas one afternoon at the library, his hands tracing foreign finance textbooks, his eyes distant. "You've been different," she said gently, sliding into the seat across from him. He looked at her, half smiling. "Have I?" "You don't walk with your head down anymore," she said simply. "It suits you." Her words lingered longer than he expected. Rebecca was no grand declaration, no dramatic gesture. She was loyalty in silence, presence without demand. He thought of how she had always defended him quietly, how she had never once mocked him, never asked for anything. She was proof that not all bonds were chains. He wondered, fleetingly, what his life might have been if he had noticed her sooner. But fate had already written a different script, and Thomas no longer believed in rewriting the past. He could only shape the future. The suspense of his hidden departure gnawed at him daily. Each time Jessica's mother smiled at him, he fought the urge to spit out the truth, that he was leaving, that he would never again bow before her rituals. Each time Jessica scolded him, he swallowed the urge to laugh, to tell her she had already lost him. At night, he organized his documents in silence, passport, bank slips, the letter from his uncle. By day, he played the obedient son, nodding, praying, drinking the bitter soups that no longer tasted like medicine but like poison. Jessica's restlessness grew. She began watching him with suspicion, as though sensing the ground shifting beneath her feet. She snapped at him more often, her tone sharper. "Why don't you come to bed? Why are you always busy? Who are you meeting?" Her anger was laced with something else, fear, foe. For the first time in their lives together, it was Jessica who felt abandoned. Thomas noticed, and he relished it. The shadow she had despised was no longer at her side, and now, in the hollow silence of its absence, Jessica realized she had never hated it as much as she claimed. She had simply assumed it would always be there. Now, that assumption was dying. The night before his planned departure, Thomas stood by the window of his room, the moonlight casting pale silver across the floor. He held one of the fallen bracelet beads between his fingers, rolling it slowly. This bead, this trinket, once it had meant everything. Proof of affection, anchor of hope. Now it was only glass, worthless, hollow. He dropped it, listening as it tapped against the wooden floor and rolled into the shadows. Behind him, he could hear Jessica's restless footsteps in the hall, pacing like a caged bird. She knocked once on his door, then left without entering. Thomas closed his eyes, the ghost of disinfectant still haunting his nose, Frank's laughter still echoing in his ears. Tomorrow, he would be gone. And for the first time in years, the thought did not terrify him, it set him free. The morning Thomas left dawned grey, the summer air thick with the promise of rain. He wheeled his single suitcase down the polished hall of the Liu household, each step echoing in silence. Liu father and Liu mother were away on business, and Jessica had risen late, her hair still unbrushed, her eyes swollen from a sleepless night. She saw the suitcase and frowned. "Where are you going?" "To a classmate's," Thomas said calmly, the lie smooth on his tongue. He had already told her mother the same story the night before. Jessica's lips curled in disdain. "Then go, don't expect the driver to pick you up. It's my family's driver, not yours." Her words might once have pierced him. This time, they slid off like rain against steel. He walked past her without another glance. What she did not see was the letter tucked neatly under a book in his room, its short message written in his measured hand. "I'm gone, please don't look for me." It was not addressed to Jessica, it was addressed to her parents, a final act of courtesy to the house that had claimed to raise him. South City's airport buzzed with departures and reunions, but for Thomas, it felt like the threshold to another life. When he boarded the flight, clutching his passport and the foreign ticket from his uncle, he felt an odd calm. Behind him lay decades of humiliation, ahead stretched a horizon unshackled. When he landed in F country, the world felt different. The air smelled of grass and machinery, not incense and disinfectant. His uncle met him with weathered hands and a cautious smile. The man looked older than Thomas remembered, his face carved by years of work under harsh sun. "You look like your mother," the uncle murmured, voice thick with memory. The farm was sprawling, a patchwork of fields and cattle, and though it was not glamorous, it was real. Work was honest, money tangible. Thomas learned to ride horses, to mend fences, to manage workers. The rhythm of farm life was foreign but grounding. For the first time, he ate meals without Jessica's mother watching, without bitter soup forced between his lips. At night, in the small farmhouse, Thomas read through finance books and business journals, teaching himself what lay beyond the soil. The farm was only a beginning. His uncle's modest success was proof that opportunity was possible. Thomas wanted more. Back in City A, Jessica grew restless. At first, she assumed Thomas would return, tail tucked, as he always did. But days passed, then weeks. His room stood empty, stripped of clothes and keepsakes. In the corner, she found a bead from the broken bracelet, the one she had torn apart in anger. It glittered faintly under the light, mocking her. She searched for him, called classmates, visited friends. No one knew where he had gone. The only trace was the farewell note on his desk, addressed not to her, but to her parents. The realization sank slowly, like ice through her veins. Thomas had left her. The shadow she had scorned had vanished, and the silence it left behind was unbearable. Life abroad moved forward. Thomas began with small ventures, exporting clothing and farm produce to neighboring countries. With 3 classmates, he started a modest company. They worked out of cramped apartments, shipping goods by truck and ferry, learning the language of trade through mistakes and small profits. When the group dissolved, Thomas did not stop. He took his earnings, reinvested, and turned to dairy. From raising cows on his uncle's farm to building a processing line, he crafted an entire chain. Each step reduced costs, each decision sharpened his acumen. By his third year abroad, Thomas was no longer the obedient orphan, he was a businessman. Two women became unlikely companions during this rise. The first was Monica, a Spanish classmate with fiery eyes and a sharper tongue. She teased him relentlessly, calling him too serious, but her energy pushed him into risks he might otherwise have avoided. Together, they negotiated contracts with traders, her charisma balancing his restraint. The second was Anna, his secretary when the company grew large enough to require one. With icy composure and an almost obsessive attention to detail, Anna shielded him from distractions, her loyalty bordering on possessive. Between Monica's fire and Anna's ice, Thomas found a balance, a team that allowed him to focus on building his empire. He did not forget Rebecca either. Her quiet loyalty, years ago, lingered like a ghost. Whenever he saw Monica argue fiercely or Anna stand protectively, he thought of Rebecca, the silent friend who had believed in him long before he believed in himself. Years later, when Thomas returned to City A, it was not as the orphan boy trailing behind Jessica, but as a man who had built wealth with his own hands. The banquet that welcomed foreign investors glittered with chandeliers and champagne. Developers and businessmen filled the hall, their eyes turning toward Thomas with recognition. He stood in the center, composed, his tailored suit sharper than the sneers Jessica's mother once threw at him. And then, as if summoned by fate, Jessica appeared. She wore a dress that had once been expensive but now showed the wear of time. The Liu family's fortune had dwindled, and it showed in the faint wrinkles on her gown, the desperation in her eyes. "Thomas," she whispered when she reached him, her voice trembling, "you're finally back." Before Thomas could respond, Monica stepped forward, her hands on her hips. "And who are you?" she asked sharply. Anna followed, her voice cool. "Please keep your distance, Frau. I'm my boss." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you treating me like this? Don't you remember our years together?" Thomas met her gaze, his face unreadable. "I remember. 30 years of silence, 30 years of being nothing more than your family's tool." Frank appeared then, late as always, his suit ill-fitting, his smile false. He clutched Jessica's arm possessively. "Don't bother with him," Frank said loudly, puffing his chest. "He's just pretending to be someone important." The room quieted. Businessmen exchanged glances, some smirking. Frank's words were reckless. Every investor in the hall knew who Thomas was. Thomas did not reply. He didn't need to. His silence, his presence, was enough to expose Frank's ignorance. It was then that Martin, the host of the banquet, stepped forward. "Mr. Thomas is our honored guest," he announced, "the man co-investing in the largest development in City A. Without him, this project would not exist." Frank's face drained of color, Jessica's lips parted in shock, and Thomas only smiled faintly, as if watching a play unfold. What Jessica and Frank never realized was that the Liu family's decline had not been entirely fate. Years earlier, while Thomas was still abroad, he had made small moves, subtle investments, quiet partnerships, carefully timed market shifts. Each decision had nudged the Liu family's fragile company closer to collapse. Policies tightened, credit dried, opportunities slipped through their fingers. By the time Jessica's parents realized, it was too late. Their fortune had cracked, their empire already crumbling. Now, standing at the banquet, Thomas looked at Jessica's pleading eyes, Frank's shallow bravado, and felt no anger, only clarity. He had not needed to lift a sword or shout revenge. He had simply stepped aside, let their greed consume them, and given fate a little push. Jessica reached for him one last time. "Thomas, please, can we start again?" But Thomas's answer was the same as the one he had given her mother years ago, the answer that had changed everything. "No." The storm that had been building finally broke on the night of the investors' gala. Thomas stood tall among polished marble pillars and crystal chandeliers, the center of attention in a room filled with wealth and power. Men twice his age deferred to him, women whispered his name with admiration. Deals were struck with a handshake, glasses of champagne clinking in recognition of his authority. And then, through the glittering crowd, came the ghost he had once called wife. Jessica. Her dress clung too tightly, trying to mimic elegance while betraying frayed seams. Her eyes, once aloof, then restless, now burned with desperation. She pushed past Anna's sharp glare and Monica's mocking smirk, ignoring the disapproving murmurs of the crowd. "Thomas," she gasped, reaching for him. "Please, listen to me." The crowd shifted, sensing drama. Thomas did not flinch. He merely set down his glass and regarded her like a stranger. Jessica pulled a small object from her clutch, a bracelet. Its beads had been restrung clumsily, gaps betraying the damage she herself had once inflicted. She held it out with trembling hands. "I fixed it for you. I kept it all these years. I wanted to give it back." Her voice cracked. "I was wrong. All of it. Everything I said, everything I did. It wasn't me. It was my mother. She told me to treat you coldly, to push you away, to make you obey. I thought if I resisted, I'd finally have freedom. I didn't know I was destroying you, destroying us. Thomas. I always loved you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Monica arched an eyebrow and covered her mouth in a shallow laugh. Anna stepped forward, her hand tightening on Thomas's arm, her icy voice slicing through the tension. "Keep your distance from my boss." Jessica's eyes brimmed with tears. "Don't call him your boss, he's my husband." The room froze. Monica's laughter sharpened. "Husband? You threw him away for Frank, now you crawl back because your family is ruined? Pathetic." Even Rebecca, usually silent, moved closer to Thomas, her quiet presence forming a wall of solidarity. Jessica's gaze darted between them, Monica's contempt, Anna's protectiveness, Rebecca's steady loyalty, and her face twisted with humiliation. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't let them mock me like this, please, look at me, I'm begging you." Thomas's lips curved in a faint smile, cold as winter frost. "You still don't understand, do you?" Jessica blinked, her tears spilling. "Understand what?" "That you're not even worthy of being my opponent," Thomas said softly, his voice carrying across the hall. "I wasted 30 years trying to win love from a woman who couldn't give it, who didn't even value herself. Now, I don't care, I don't hate you, I don't love you, I feel nothing at all." The words shattered her more cruelly than rage ever could. Her knees buckled, the bracelet slipping from her fingers and scattering beads across the marble floor. They rolled under gilded chairs, into shadows, just as her dignity scattered before the watching crowd. Frank, who had lurked at the edge, tried to rush forward, but the investors hissed disapproval, blocking his path. His shallow grin faltered, his arm jerking awkwardly as Jessica collapsed to the floor. It was then that blood began to bloom against the pale silk of her dress. A gasp rose, sharp, horrified. Jessica clutched her stomach, her cries piercing through the shocked silence. The crimson trail spreading beneath her was an echo of another lifetime, another ending, but Thomas did not move. He did not kneel, did not reach for her. He simply turned his face away, his expression unreadable. As security rushed in, as the crowd whispered scandal, as Frank hesitated between saving his reputation and saving Jessica, Thomas lifted his glass once more. He sipped calmly, as though none of it concerned him. Jessica's screams followed him even as he left the hall, her blood staining the marble like a grotesque confession written in red. Weeks later, the newspapers told the rest. Jessica had survived, but barely. Her child, Frank's child, was lost. Frank abandoned her soon after, vanishing with what little wealth remained, leaving her with debts and disgrace. The Liu company, already fragile, collapsed into bankruptcy. Her mother, once imperious, now lay paralyzed after a sudden accident, her mind shattered. And Jessica herself? Arrested after a violent altercation with Frank that ended in his death. The scandal consumed her, her beauty and charm twisted into infamy. It was in prison that she sent for Thomas. The meeting room was stark, fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Jessica was thinner, her hair cut short by prison regulations, her once pristine skin marred by stress. Yet her eyes still sought him with a desperate intensity. "Thomas," she whispered when she saw him, clutching the table as though he might vanish. "You came." He sat across from her, posture calm, suit immaculate. "You asked. I came." She bit her lip, tears filling her eyes. "I remember everything now, memories that aren't even mine. I saw it all, how I destroyed you, how I made you suffer. I told myself it was rebellion, that I was escaping my parents' control, but in truth, I was a coward. I loved you, Thomas, I did, I didn't know how to face it." Her words spilled like a dam breaking. Please, forgive me, hate me, punish me, but don't ignore me. I've lost everything, my family, my name, my child. I only want you to know I still love you." Thomas studied her for a long moment, his face readable. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. "You think this is punishment?" His voice was low, almost gentle. "You think Makoto's fist, Frank's betrayal, your mother's paralysis, your company's collapse, these were coincidences?" Jessica's breath hitched. What do you mean?" Thomas's smile was thin, razor sharp. "Policies don't shift overnight. Investors don't withdraw by chance. Banquet invitations don't get lost unless someone makes sure they do. And Frank, well, he was easy enough to push onto center stage, a shallow man with shallow greed, perfect bait." Her face drained of color. You orchestrated it?" "I nudged," Thomas corrected. "Just enough to let your greed, your arrogance, your lies consume you. Everything else, Jessica, was your choice." Her hands shook violently. "You hate me that much?" "No," Thomas said softly. "I don't waste hate on you anymore. That's the difference between then and now. Hate would mean you still mattered, and you don't." Jessica's tears fell freely, splattering onto the cold table. She reached across, but he did not move. Her hand hovered in the empty space between them, trembling, before finally dropping. Silence stretched. Then Thomas rose, adjusting his cufflinks. "Goodbye, Jessica, this time, it really is the end." He turned, his footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. Behind him, Jessica's sobs broke into laughter, hollow, bitter, self-mocking. "I was so foolish," she whispered to the empty air. "I thought rebellion made me strong, but all it did was ruin me." The guards led her away, her broken laughter lingering like ashes. Outside, rain fell in silver sheets, streaking across the windows of the black sedan that waited for Thomas. He slid inside, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. Beside him sat Monica and Anna, both silent for once. Rebecca's message glowed faintly on his phone. "I believe in you. Always have." Thomas closed his eyes, letting the hum of the engine soothe him. In the distance, new towers rose from the ground, steel and glass monuments to his empire. The city that once mocked him now bowed to his name. Jessica's cries faded into memory, the beads of her bracelet were lost in shadows. The kitten that once symbolized his own rejection was replaced by the purring warmth of the ginger cat waiting in his apartment abroad. His revenge had been merciless but quiet, his triumph undeniable but cold. For Thomas, it was enough. The news broke quietly, tucked between headlines of political scandals and economic shifts. Jessica Liu, daughter of the once prominent Liu family, sentenced to life imprisonment after the killing of Frank Xu. The trial had been swift, her defense was weak, her reputation already stained by years of gossip and scandal. The verdict was not surprising. For the world, she became a cautionary tale, beauty ruined by arrogance, wealth squandered by greed, love lost to betrayal. But for Thomas, it was nothing more than the final line in a story he had already finished writing. Frank's name disappeared from society as quickly as he had risen. Opportunistic to the core, he had siphoned what remained of the Liu fortune before his violent end. Even in death, he left nothing of value behind, no loyalty, no legacy, only debts. Jessica's parents fared no better. Liu's father, cornered by creditors, collapsed in his office one morning and never rose again. His funeral drew whispers more than tears. Businessmen who once flattered him spoke of his poor decisions, as though he had never mattered, and Liu's mother, once imperious, once the smiling tyrant who had dictated Thomas's life, was reduced to a husk. A car accident had left her paralyzed, bedridden, her mind wandering in and out of coherence. The woman who had once forced him to kneel, to swallow bitter soups, to accept humiliation in silence, now lay drooling on a pillow, her body covered in bed sores. It was there that Thomas visited her. The stench of decay filled the hospital room, sour and thick. A single nurse sat half asleep in the corner, paid too little to care. The fluorescent light flickered, casting shadows across the bed where Liu's mother lay, her eyes cloudy yet still burning with fragments of resentment. Thomas stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tiles. He stood at her bedside, hands in his pockets, looking down at the woman who had once towered over his life. "Madam," he said softly, his voice calm, measured. "Do you remember the bowls of ginseng you forced down my throat, the prayers you made me whisper until my knees bled? Do you remember asking if I was even a man?" Her lips moved, forming sounds that barely escaped. Drool slid down her chin. Thomas leaned closer, his smile thin, his words sharp as knives. Now you taste what I lived, now you understand what it means to be helpless, mocked, and forgotten. Her eyes widened, rage sparking faintly in their dullness. She tried to lift her arm, to strike him, to push him away, but her muscles betrayed her. Her hand trembled uselessly, falling back to the bed with a weak thud. Thomas straightened, smoothing his cufflinks. Don't worry, I won't let you die quickly. You'll live, you'll rot slowly, while the world forgets your name. That is more fitting than mercy. He turned without another glance. The nurse stirred awake just long enough to see him leave, his figure sharp against the corridor's sterile light. Jessica's end came not long after. In the prison yard, whispers circulated, how she had grown thinner, how her once flawless skin was marked by scars of stress, how she spoke often to shadows, laughing bitterly at memories only she could see. She had tried, more than once, to reach Thomas again through letters, but none were answered. Her final request, to see him before her sentence began, was denied. When the iron door slammed shut behind her cell, Jessica knew the truth. The man she once scorned was not her salvation, but her executioner, though his hands remained clean. And so, the Liu family vanished from prominence, consumed by the very greed and pride that had once made them powerful. Thomas did not celebrate, he did not raise a glass to his revenge or laugh at their downfall, he simply continued forward, as though their destruction was inevitable, as though their story had always been destined to collapse. What he did allow himself was a quiet visit to his parents' graves. He placed fresh lilies against the stone, speaking softly into the wind. Father, Mother, I kept my promise, they will never harm me again. The rain began to fall then, light at first, then heavier, blurring the names etched into stone. Thomas let it soak his shoulders, his suit, his hair slick against his forehead. He did not move. Only when the downpour grew fierce did he turn back, stepping into the black sedan that waited at the edge of the cemetery. Inside the car, silence reigned. Monica sat with her arms crossed, smirking faintly as if she had already forgotten Jessica's name. Anna sat rigidly, her gaze fixed on Thomas, her loyalty wordless. On the seat beside him, his phone buzzed with a single message from Rebecca. You did it, now, live for yourself. Thomas closed his eyes, leaning back against the leather seat. The city outside rushed past in streaks of neon blurred by rain, its skyline jagged with towers he had helped build. The commercial district glowed with life, a monument not to revenge, but to survival, to transformation. His hand drifted to the bracelet bead in his pocket, the last remnant of Jessica. He rolled it once between his fingers, then opened the window. The bead slipped from his hand, vanishing into the rain-slicked street below, swallowed by the current of water rushing along the gutter. Beside him, a soft sound stirred. A ginger cat, curled on the seat, lifted its head and stretched, purring as Thomas's hand brushed its fur. Its warmth, simple and genuine, was nothing like the cold affections he had once begged for. The bead was gone. The kitten he once lost had returned, not the same, but something new, proof that love could exist without chains, without humiliation. Thomas exhaled slowly, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. The past was ashes, the Liu family was dust, and he, once the orphan they had mocked, was now a man whose empire reached higher than their wildest dreams. The sedan glided through the storm, its headlights cutting through the night. Behind him lay ruin, ahead, a skyline blazing with opportunity. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt no weight on his shoulders, no invisible chains dragging him back. Only silence, only freedom. And in that silence, there was closure.